Hi, and thanks for joining me. My name is Elizabeth Zehnpfennig, and next year I'll be teaching at the Twin Cities German Immersion School in St. Paul, Minnesota. So if you've joined me, you are probably a German teacher, maybe even the only German teacher at your school, or if you do have a colleague, definitely not as large as the Spanish department. So you know that our classes need to be exciting, engaging, and really get to student interest. So this session is called Kultur macht Spaß, which was the same name of a course that I came up with. And the idea is to teach art and gain fluency through those arts. So this is a journey through a year-long course, semester's worth of material. It was an A/B day, and just kind of explaining where I came from and where I ended. Targets for this session are to understand how to insert an arts lesson into whatever regular curriculum you already have in order to increase basically the fluency of basic vocabulary, things that we say about ourselves. I will understand the benefits of adding an art lesson beyond the language value. So there is cultural references that are satisfying graduation standards and things like that as well. It's just learning language. Hopefully you'll walk out with a lesson for whenever Monday is, and that you'll know how to have other access to lessons like this. So I just want you to take a thinking moment. This would have been a think, pair, share if we were in face-to-face, but think for a second, how do you currently insert art into your program? And from that, what is your favorite lesson involving some kind of art? Just take a second to think about where you're at already. I want to meet you where you're at. This was how I started. Excuse me. I was thinking about where I already was in art. And I came to a couple of artists that I always really were drawn to, Hundertwasser and Albrecht Dürer. For whatever reason, they always kind of inserted themselves into my curriculum, whether it was from German 1 or German 4. They always sort of found themselves there. So I knew that I wasn't starting from scratch. What happened was our school changed schedules, and I needed to add a alternating day class, basically like an A/B class. And for an elective, it was basically creating an elective for an elective. So my base was very small. I was pulling from students that I already had in German. I knew that I wanted to keep the class in German, and I wanted to take a second to think about the 5 C's in global language learning. And I wanted to focus mostly on the first 3, but I didn't want to leave out the last 2. From that, an elective was born. I knew I needed to make it interesting. I knew I needed to make it in German. I knew I needed to make it differentiated because my course had German 2, German 3, and German 4 students in it. I needed to make it easy to plan for because I was already teaching 4 other levels, 5 other sections. This was my 5.5. And I knew I needed to make it so that I could offer it every year and that it wouldn't necessarily be the same. I needed to advance language, basic skills, while still covering new content. So I came at some essential questions. What is culture? What is art? I knew I wanted the students to start there and unpacking those personal ideas. I knew I needed to understand how art came from culture and how it led my understanding of a culture's art could lead to a better understanding of a culture. And I knew that I also wanted to talk about cultural influences. How did art become what art was? The population around the culture, and how does it speak to both sides? So I settled on the 3 forms of art that you see here. I was going to do visual art, focusing on my Hundertwasser and my Dürer, but I was also going to bring in music because I knew that was going to be easy to plan. I knew I had a lot of lessons already, and I knew that kids were going to love it. And then film. Because why wouldn't you? Film is great. It's always great to be able to work film in. I was going to end the year with film, so I knew that also I was going to come up with some easy plans and kind of, you know, this is my 5th class that I'm teaching. I have 250 kids. It felt like it anyway. I know, how can I end the year and have the kids say, wow, that was a great class, tell all their friends, or come back and take it the next year. We started unpacking our own culture, and I created a student project called Mein Wappen. It looks like I have a student sample here for you to look at. This was an example of something that a student did. I told them what was the art that influenced them, or what were the things that influenced them. So they came up with a collage of the things that they found that inspired them. So they thought about movies, they thought about music, they thought about people, and they came up with an assignment that looked something similar to the Wapens for the Bundesländer. And I came up with a project where they basically started, I was combining this class of German 2, 3, and 4. So there were kids in there that didn't know each other. So this became a really great way to start out the year. First of all, it kept them busy for a while doing this project, pulling stuff together, thinking about art, getting the gears, thinking about culture. But then I also had this great activity where they sat in small circles, in comfortable circles, hopefully with someone new, and they got to just say a lot of what they did. So this kiddo came up with something, I'm sure she said, ich spiele gern Fußball, but then she also got to say like a couple of what she likes. Ich mag gern Game of Thrones, ich sehe Filme mit Freunden. I'm not sure what she said, but you see how this is using all the stuff that they've already learned, basically telling the student, hey, I can already talk about art a little bit. Then I started with the visual art unit. Because I had chosen these 3, visual art, film, and music, I broke it down into 12 weeks. And I had to think about how can I talk about visual arts with those German 2 kids in the room and the German 4 kids. Well, we've already talked about colors. Everybody in the room knows the word for colors. So let's bring in the Farbkreis. And we talked about how the colors blended together. We talked about where in the culture you would find where in our culture you would find those colors. And because I teach with comprehensible input, I teach with CI, I didn't have to come up with a lesson plan for this. I just needed them to sit in front of a Farbkreis and hear and listen and use this as the basis for a wonderful 35-minute lesson where they were listening and understanding everything I was saying. We then took that Farbkreis and we started to describe some art that we saw. So sometimes they were responsible for bringing in their own art piece. Sometimes we would all look at the same one together. Sometimes I would give them an artist's name and have them take 20 minutes to Google this guy or this gal's art, see what you can find, pick one, and share with the class. One of the ways I like to do that is just having everybody be an editor on a Google Slides sheet, and everybody just was kind of adding art. So the 3 that I chose were Dürer, mostly because, well, I think he's amazing, but our city does this exchange with Nuremberg, a city in the area of Nuremberg, and he's from Nuremberg. So we go to visit his house, and there's definitely a cultural connection there. And then I chose Klimt and Hundertwasser. I knew that Klimt was going to come up because he's the second guy you see here, because we were going to watch The Woman in Gold later on, and I knew that the art that he had a really interesting story. Hundertwasser, that guy's just great, and I just love him, and his art is so fun for kids to mimic. So then I came up with kind of a system where I would talk about the biography of these artists, and then within that, I was teaching things or reteaching or adding on all that layered of differentiation to how can we talk about ourselves. So we would look at a biography of Albrecht Dürer, and then we would answer questions about himself. So Albrecht Dürer wurde in, gosh, I don't know the number off the top of my head, blah, 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 geboren. Wann wurdest du geboren? Things like that. So we were able to talk about ourselves. Ist aus Nürnberg gekommen. Woher bist du gekommen? Things like that. So past tense also was great because these 3 artists were dead. So not great for them being dead, but you understand what I'm saying, that it was great because I could talk about them in the past tense. And we don't really get into the past tense, especially in CI, until a little bit later on in German 2. So this was something that was new for the beginning level kids and definitely needed tons of reviewing with the levels 3 and 4. So the first thing I always did was I established vocabulary that we already knew using a KWL chart, which is basically knowledge. It's in English, so it's know, want to know, and learn, but it kind of works in German too if you fudge the kennen and wissen a little bit. So we came up with this list together of what do we already know? How can we already talk about art? Kids talk about colors, they talk about like and dislike. And then, well, from that list, what are the holes? What are the deficits? What do we need to fill in with? And that's how we came up with our vocabulary list. So the kids had pointed out that we didn't know a lot of the names for shapes. For whatever reason, maybe because we're not in elementary, shapes don't come up. So this was an opportunity for us to learn a lot of shapes, opportunity for us to learn the words for art and artist, painting, forms. You can see what we came up with. We talked about architecture a little bit because it was the anniversary of, oh my gosh, I can't think of that kind of design. It'll come back to me. So we talked about architecture a little bit too. That was the vocabulary that I then wove everything we did into. And then at the end, that was the testable bit, right? I wasn't necessarily going to test them on the culture or on the art, but I was going to test them about what they could say and to take those words and to even use them in a different context, right? Words for shapes, that is great for art as well as furniture, houses, all that kind of stuff. Really expanding the basic vocabulary. Every unit we would start with a WebQuest, where the kids themselves would kind of dive into the research. This is an example of the one that I did on Albert Dürer, where you can see I'm having the kids find photos, and then they're filling in, and then we get to look at all this. So remember when I said this was my 5th class, I didn't have a ton of extra time to prep. So now I'm not digging through hundreds of paintings. I'm not digging through anything because the kids are doing it for me. And if I went and picked out my 5 favorite Albrecht Dürer pieces, who's to say that they're the same as a 16-year-old kiddos? If they're controlling who picks, or that they pick the art, there's an instant buy-in, and I needed that buy-in. So we saw a lot of building of vocabulary because when we went from Albrecht Dürer to Klimt, we could transfer all of that knowledge and build on it again. And now the word Gemälde and portrait and all of those things are just part of what we know. We don't need to start over. I talked a little bit about how the artist's bio kind of became helpful for the students talking about themselves. And I have a whole PowerPoint that I talked about with Hundertwasser and like some very basic things about, you know, where he came from and where he went to school and things like that. It's all included in my presentation. For each of the artists, I had the students make a piece of art. So for Albrecht Dürer, we explored the idea of Holzschnitt. For Klimt, we made our own Schüler in Gold, which is a play on the woman in gold. And then for Hundertwasser, we designed a Hundertwasser house. That project is at the end of this PowerPoint that I included, where it kind of explains that you are now the designer and you're going to take this old and ugly Plattenbau and you are going to create something Hundertwasser-like. We talk about forms and functions and lines, clean lines versus loopy lines and things like that. So the kids are now spending, I would say 3 class periods just sitting and enjoying each other and doing the art. And at the end of that whole unit, there isn't a kid in that room who can't name Albrecht Dürer and identify him by his work and by his picture. I did a couple of summative tests because I felt like, all right, if we're gaining cultural knowledge, here's what I want the kids to be able to do. I want them to be able to be knowledgeable about who is undeniably the most famous, maybe even most important, this is all debatable, German artist of all time, Dürer. He's our Michelangelo, people. He's the guy who, when you go to the Louvre, you're going to see that. And so I kind of wanted them to say, if you're looking at these 3, is that Hundertwasser? Yeah, tell me why. Well, because it's got wavy lines, because of the color, because it's a building. All right, is that you know, to be able to describe about Dürer. There were a couple of paintings that I also wanted to work in and make sure that they knew. For example, Der Feldhase, if you are familiar with Dürer, well, it's my favorite, but it's the one that everybody should know. Kind of like not knowing the Mona Lisa. Then I did some sort of test like that where I was taking those words that we had known, you know, which one was German and which ones were Austrian, which one painted Der Kuss, which one did the rhinoceros out of holz, all these things. Time periods are important and things like that. And then just kind of matching up some real, if you can't do this part, you've missed the boat, because this is really big picture. And satisfying those cultural comparisons standards that we have in language learning, because I did it in German. Everything we did in target language. These are some examples of some assessments that we did. This happened to work out really great in that I had a field trip to the Mall, or not the Mall of America, I'm from Minnesota, to the Minnesota, gosh, what does it stand for? Minneapolis Institute of Art. We're a suburb just outside of Minneapolis. And this Minneapolis Art Institute just happened to have a bunch of German art. So we went and we looked at it all, and we did research before, because we hadn't talked about Egon Schiele, we hadn't talked about Clay, some of these other really great artists. One thing I regret is that there weren't as many female artists, and there are very few artists of color. So it really was focusing a lot on old white dudes. But if I could change that, I would. I just liked to address it at least with the kids, and I'm putting that out there. And then we had this great example of, I have this all on here if you want to check out how I did that. It's pretty specific if you don't have an art museum near you. So the takeaways from that art unit were that I could easily replicate this next year with different artists, right? I can bring Paul Clay in now because I haven't talked about him, and I can do all the same things. And then the differentiation becomes a little bit easier as you go along. The students were really engaged with the projects, and I would hang them up in the hallway. I had this great big hallway full of Schüler in Gold, and man, everybody stopped and everybody asked. And then the next year, I had a bunch of kids sign up for this class again. There was a lot of student choice in this. The students were choosing what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it and what they wanted to study. The only thing I chose was the artist. Very little prep. Kids are engaged in language. The kids are learning. And this is a class that I actually taught, I think it was 3 years ago. And I had those guys as seniors this year, and they didn't lose any of that information. They actually really retained it, which proves, the theories about engagement and learning and student choice just kind of solidifying learning. I moved on to music, and we all use music as language teachers. It's our cash cow. It's the best bang for our buck that we've got. So I had a lot of stuff that I was pulling. We're German teachers, so Goethe Institute has all those, what does that say called, like Go Music or something like that, that were already out there for me. So what I did was I established vocabulary the same way I did with art. I came up with a similar sheet. And I wanted them to learn these genres because I thought, what a great way to discuss. Up until this point, these students haven't learned the words Sänger, Gruppe, Lied. We can all talk about, ja, ich mag das, or ich habe das gern, but gefällt dir and das gefällt mir is always trickier for my students. So I wanted to hit that, and I wanted to hit it hard every day so that by the end, there wasn't a kiddo in this room who couldn't understand that construction, because it's very different than any of the English ways we have to say something is, I was going to say pleasing to me, that I like something. I did this sheet that you have here that I created, you could use, if you're not going to do this class, you could simply use for Musikmittwoch. So you take a month or two and you pick a bunch of songs and you hit those ideas. To some prior knowledge with Kennst du die Musiker, I was really surprised. Beyond Nena from 99 Luftballons and Rammstein for a couple of my kiddos, German music is not super well known, as well as German art. We could name Ninja Turtles and we could name things like the Mona Lisa, but when it came to art, my kids couldn't name a lot of any art, much less German art. So this was just really creating a larger knowledge base in general, and it was really fun to kind of learn some of this stuff with them. Then we just started listening to a bunch of music. I would pick one song, and I kind of went through the genres, and we'd start with that song. We'd listen to it a bunch of times, and I would do just kind of little different things that depended on what the song had. For example, the song Auf uns, right? Like, what German doesn't know all the words to the song? And then we talk about the cultural importance. Well, this was played when the Germans won the World Cup. It was played every day when the Germans won the World Cup. When they went to the Fanmeile in Berlin, there he is, Andreas Borani, singing Auf uns to the German team. And then I show them all these different videos, and it's like builds this excitement. It's like you're there. It's like you're part of the culture. So, we kind of chunk it out in something a little bit here, a little bit there, something for every day, so that by the end, they kind of start to understand a little bit of what the song is about. What I've noticed is music is great, but if you just listen to it, you're not learning anything. You're just enjoying it. What became very clear to me was when students would like a song and they would listen to it over and over again, and then they would come in and they would be able to sing the chorus, or they would ask me about what words meant. And I knew that I needed to get the kids to listen to it over and over and over again, but I needed it to not be boring. So a different task every day, or a different video, a different version. Like, there's live versions, there's MTV Live unplugged versions. There's all kinds of different versions that you can find. The final project for this section was so much fun. I've included it in here. It is basically about completely understanding it's completely understanding a song for tone, understanding its main idea, and then portraying that understanding in a video. And what I had them do was I had them first take a song and then chunk it, understand it, translate it, paraphrase it, work with it. This was, I would say we probably worked on this for 5 or 6 class periods, and lots of me roving around and helping, lots of kids helping each other. And then they were writing about it. I came up with this whole summative idea of them, like, starting with the chorus, explaining what the chorus means. What does it mean to you, right? Connecting to yourself. For example, the song Herz über Kopf by Joris. If you don't know it, you should check it out. And the entire idea in the song is that he is choosing in this relationship that he's in, whether he's going to listen to his head or listen to his heart. So the student goes through and finds, you start with all the words that you know first, and then you start looking up some of the ones you don't, and then you start piecing it together. So it's a great lesson in paraphrasing and translating. We talked about translators. We talked about Google Translate. Some of those ideas came up. And then here is an example. I won't play the whole thing for you. Oh no, that is not the example. You know what, I am so sorry. I didn't have the example of it. And then they created a video for it. I'll have to include that at the end. For some things to do during that, I've got some where students took time to come up with these projects about who their favorite singer is. We are still constantly working with Sängerin, Sänger, Lied, Gruppe, all those kinds of things. And then, they did some sharing with students. We took some differentiation opportunities to talk about music in a different way. So I gave basically each level in class a different word list. So if you were a German 2 student, I wanted you to basically learn, Sänger, Sängerin, Lied, things like that. But if you were in German 3 and 4, we kind of took it to the next level. We came up with words that I thought were good for talking about music, like Ohrwurm. Das Lied ist der Hammer, things like that. Das ist urcool. I asked my kids, my actual children, hey, what are some cool words that I can use to talk about music? And that's how I got those words. Richtig krass. If you are in CI and you are on the Facebook page, there are activities for music all over. Step into German is a great website. Then I went into Filma. By now it's 12 weeks left in the year, 10 weeks left in the year, and you're kind of running out of steam. And keep in mind, this is my elective, so I'm like really tired. film. I'm going to pick film. I picked 3 actors, 3 films, and I did the same thing. I started with biography. We started with what we knew and what we wanted to say. So I picked Daniel Brühl because he is, he's been in a bunch of movies and he's been in some Avenger movies. So the kids were likely to maybe recognize him. I picked Diane Kruger because she's Austrian and I was really looking for getting some ladies in there. And then I picked Til Schweiger, mostly because of the movie I wanted to show. But I always say, he's the Tom Cruise of movies. He's got his own production company. He's in a bunch of movies. He's not so bad on the eyes. See, other cultures have these kind of mythical beings in their culture as well. So we went to the Wikipedia pages. We watched interviews on YouTube. We heard them speaking. We heard them speaking English. That was pretty cool too. Daniel Brühl speaks, I think, 5 different languages. We talk culturally about how that's just different than our culture. Then we would start to kind of compile what it is that we knew about them. We would keep track of the things that we learned with some circle maps. And then at the end, I would have students write true or false questions, and then they would be writing their own formative assessments. So Daniel Brühl kommt aus Österreich. Oh, falsch. Er kommt aus Deutschland oder Spanien. Kann sein. Yeah, I'm not sure. His mom was from Spain. Then we chose movies, and I chose Honig im Kopf for Til Schweiger. I chose Lila Lila for Daniel Brühl, and we would look at these posters, come up with some predictions. So to just have the kids do timed writes for 5 minutes and write about this picture and try to predict what the movie might be about. Wow, the movie has a dad and a grandpa and a daughter, and they're on the beach and they're on vacation and just getting their little noodles thinking about what they're going to see. Then when it came time to show these movies, I don't know why this says remove this later. Sorry about that. I see, this was for me to read. I ran each movie the same. I began with the prediction of the movie by looking at the title. Then I showed them the trailer. Then we would watch the film. I did not create a giant study guide for them for this film. Instead, I would stop every 15, 20 minutes, ask questions using CI. Where are they? Who is that? How are they related? What is the problem? How do you think they might solve that? Then we would start to summarize afterwards. So I would stop the movie, when there was a good 10, 15 minutes left in the class period, again, asking all these questions, and then I would have them journal. I would have them summarize what they could. And they could only use the words that they knew. They had to be paying attention, they had to be listening. And then we would unpack anything interesting about culture. For example, the train system in Honig im Kopf is really a great introduction into how trains connect Europe. Then each movie ended kind of with an opinion piece. Did you like the movie? Again, we're hitting all that basic vocabulary. Das gefällt mir nicht. And why, right? Dependent clauses now. All this took no prep. I just let them enjoy the film. I helped them with the processing. I helped them pull out the chunks that they knew and bring that to the forefront. But for the most part, I just let them enjoy the art. So how could you insert this into every day if you're not going to teach this class? We all have a film. Instead of leaving your film for substitute days, save it. That's for you. Those are great ideas for you. Do that, do something similar where you're just inserting a film after every unit. And you're not killing it with a giant study guide, but instead unpacking it with curriculum, with comprehensible input, or focusing on the autobiography so that students can start to talk about themselves. You could do a Künstler der Woche, where you would just look at one particular piece of art. Musik Mittwoch, which is what I said, maybe Film Freitag. You could watch a film over a month with just having the Fridays. Any kind of Kunst calendar, in October, we're going to talk about Klimt. And then when you get 30 minutes, there's sometimes where you just don't have extra stuff. It's after a test or something like that. You fill that with some of these art activities. So turn and talk with yourself. How can you see yourself using some of this? What questions might you have? And then I want you to think back to the targets. Do you understand how you could insert an arts lesson into your regular curriculum in order to increase the fluency of basic vocabulary? And do you understand the benefits of adding an art lesson beyond the language value? So it was more than just being able to talk about art, but then also being able to talk about yourself, and then also understanding, wow, this movie really represents this part of German culture. And then hopefully you have something to walk out with for a lesson. I know this is summer. I did this for a conference actually in March, right before this whole COVID thing went down, and I never got to present it. So this was my presentation. Thanks to the organization for reaching out, calling on me to see if I wanted to do this for this venue. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions and want to contact me, this is my contact. I'm in between schools right now after 20 years of teaching at this high school for which I made this class. I'm switching into administration, and I'm going to be at the Twin Cities German Immersion School in St. Paul, which is the nation's largest German immersion school. It's K-8. I'm a little bit sad after doing this to not be teaching German in a high school setting anymore, but I'm going to help others teach it, and I guess that's just as good. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions, this is the best way to get a hold of me. Thanks so much.